This is a Nectar Online series with Mr. Alex Siskos. Alex, good to be catching up today.
Amrit, same here.
Always a pleasure.
Same here.
So we'll make it a little bit easy in the beginning and just first ask you, just tell us about yourself and let the folks know who you are.
Absolutely. Alex Siskos. For the last 20-some years, I've been involved in some form or function or facet of business insights and business intelligence. I've had the opportunity to do so as part of a variety of different companies, but ultimately kind of within the area of designing, building, consulting, executing, and now managing, I guess, kind of a business insights function. Career started in consulting with Andersen Consulting, eventually Accenture, going down the path of category management and building systems kind of within that space. Moved off from there to join one of the clients, as I say, the clients that kicked my rear end the hardest, and that was Walgreens. Where I basically ran the merchandising planning and assessment department and worked very closely with the manufacturing community and was kind of the liaison, if you may, in between the vendors coming in selling their products and the buyers buying that and trying to figure out where do we put the product, how do we do so, what price, what promotion, what placement on the shelf, so all your classic 4 Ps. Then I decided to take an interesting career turn and ask myself, what would I do if I had my way? And I joined this smaller outfit called the Source that effectively allowed me to engage and build a CPG and retail practice and play in the knowledge process outsourcing world. So there was a very interesting set of experiences there that took us not only within the retail component with a variety of clients, but also kind of in the CPG arena. Variety of different folks and engaging in things like marketing analytics, loyalty analytics, and just in general kind of still containing kind of the category management. Past that, I basically decided to go back into the big company and ask the question, what would I do if I had all the data? And that's when I basically joined Nielsen. And there I managed 2 accounts on a global basis, trying to figure out how to bring the analytic framework together. And that's when I started to get into the first exposure of both, the marketing and the merchandising side of the world for some of these clients. And frankly, working through that experience is where I started to realize that there is a piece that's missing. And that's what I call the instant gratification. And that's one of the reasons why I joined my current company, which is CROSSMARK, where I'm running a business insights function and focusing on both the marketing analytics part of the business, but also kind of the category management and the sales agency part, as we call it here. And trying to figure out how to integrate that. The marketing arm is a little bit newer for us, as you know, and trying to go down that path and figure out what we need to do next.
Tell us a little bit about CROSSMARK for some of the folks that may be listening in, and certainly if you're in the grocery industry and consumer goods, et cetera, they probably pretty familiar, but for the rest of the audience, it may not be. No,
it's a good point you say that. CROSSMARK, for all intents and purposes, started out as a brokerage. So what you know as kind of an agent and a sales broker in the area of food and specifically grocery. The easiest way to describe what CROSSMARK did, because it does that now, but it does something more. But the easiest way to describe it and give you an analogy is we're the folks that you expect to show up on Thursday to cut your grass. So we do something very specific. We do it inside your stores, and we do it on a repeated basis. And the reason I say it that way is because we are the folks that are hired on by a manufacturer to ensure that the product is where it needs to be on the shelf with the appropriate price tag, with the appropriate promotional strategy that is attached to it, and it's executed inside store. So it's all about retail activation. However, this is just the retail component, because we're also the people that help you carry the bag if you're a manufacturer to meet with the retailers and make the case and make the value proposition, if you may, of why the particular item needs to be on the shelf. So if you think about a large client of ours right now, which is somebody called Chobani. Chobani started with a small broker out in the East Coast, and ultimately assigned us the responsibility about 6 months into our relationship with them to go national and to cover them effectively in every one of their retail outlets that they're interested in getting. So that extends now just your classic grocery, and you're into places like mass merchants like Walmart and Target, and then eventually moving down the path of people like C-store, grocery. So if you think about us, we're in food, drug, mass. If you think about us, we're also in specialty stores. So there is projects that are going on in places like Petco and PetSmart, or in Bed Bath & Beyond, or Home Depot. So wherever there is a product, and the product needs some attention to detail and making sure that there is the right elements of retail activation that are taking place, that's what we would do. Now, in the spirit of us moving down the marketing path, think about us walking up the path to purchase. So if you think about it, I told you everything that happens inside store, not just kind of track it backwards. So everything that we're doing right now with the addition of people like Jim Rose to our staff and presiding over our marketing analytics, our marketing aspect of the company, we're trying to figure out how we move into the stimuli that forces somebody to do what they do when they're in the store. So it's all about experiential marketing. It's all about kind of moving further up that purchase path and understanding what's going on earlier on in that path.
When you talk about the purchase path and as you described your relationship with brands like Chobani and retailers, etc., the topic we wanted to spend a little bit of time on today is big data.
Absolutely.
So I imagine if you're helping a manufacturer really determine who their customer is and that experiential marketing component, working with retailers to then say, well, what's the right product, assortment, price, etc. Big data has to be a big topic for you guys.
Absolutely is.
Talk a little bit about your perspectives on big data, what CROSSMARK potentially is thinking about, some of the challenges you may be facing, and even just starting with what does big data mean for CROSSMARK?
It's a very good question. I thought you were going to ask me, what do I feel when I hear big data? And the first word that comes to my mind is ouch. Okay? Because there's too much of it. It's coming from a variety of different sources. Those sources are not necessarily in agreement with one another, or at least talking to one another. So it's a little bit of a big mess. Not to try to be too funny here. The best way to describe how CROSSMARK's thinking about it is answering the question, where do we want to be in 3 to 5 years today, and what's our role? As do others, we also create data, so that's what kind of adds to this. When you take a look at CROSSMARK and you compare us to the industry, we probably have one of the largest data investments compared to any given retailer or manufacturer. The reason why we do that is because we obviously have to have the data of every single one of the manufacturers that we represent, and on top of that, we have to have every retailer that they're interested in going into. So that's a lot. Right, so at the end of the day, our friends at Nielsen have us on our own Netiza box, and we have been blamed of bringing down the lights in Oldsmar, Florida, when some of our queries run away over the weekends. Having said that, that's not something I'm necessarily proud of. Runaway queries being one thing, but just having a lot of data. And so the aspect and the problem that's on everybody's mind, it's not just CROSSMARK, is what is the relevant data? How do I best structure it? And then more importantly, before I even do those two things, what are the business questions I typically get confronted with? And then work backwards from there. So there's never been a time in my career, as much as it's been now, where asking what are we trying to solve for is probably the safest problem to start with. Because if you don't, you could be answering not only the wrong question, but you'd be going down a path, a rabbit hole of data that's going to have you very difficult for you to get out of, in the spirit of the amount of information that's going to be thrown at you.
So if I'm almost hearing what from an approach or process perspective, it's start with the end in mind, right? So if you're going to be thinking about big data, what matters, what doesn't, and Alex, just knowing you over the last number of years, I've always heard you use this phrase, when you're thinking about data, when you're thinking about analysis, start with the what, then move to the so what, and now move to the now what. Can you connect that back into big data in terms of particularly as brands are thinking about, geez, there's so much information. Often the question becomes, where do you start? And that's exactly what you're pointing out.
So. I'm smiling because you're right. That those three questions, you and I kind of encountered them, a while back, and believe it or not, I've worked them right into my framework here. So it is the how I like to say to our clients that every person on my staff is hardwired with those three questions. And it does start with what we're trying to solve for, because it's oftentimes, and what I always tell my staff is, are we sure we got the right problem? And it's all about cause and effect. It's all about, are we trying to trace it? That's why I told you, in the spirit of path to purchase, there's a lot of different places where I can find myself on that path. It could be a brand new item. It could be an item that's been around and established for a while. It could be an item that's overpriced, underpriced. So depending on what my situation is, there's a different part in that path that I probably want to join and kind of be part of. What I've done with those three questions, and I've done it here and I do it with our clients every single time, it's basically just saying, hey, the first thing we need to do is understand what is going on. So put it into context. If you think about that, you can align it to a scorecard that you call the executive scorecard. At the end of the day, it's just telling you what. What, since the last time we spoke, has changed? What's the thermometer? What's the temperature? It's kind of like the basic, key diagnostics. I often, do an analogy to a triage nurse, right? She's going to come in, he or she's going to come in when you're going to the doctor, going to take your vitals, right? It's not necessarily diagnose or tell you what you have or what's going on. You're going to share some information. There's going to be a little bit of a dialogue, but ultimately somebody's just trying to put their finger on the pulse of what's going on. And that's why the word is what there. Ultimately, the conversation between you and the doctor coming in starts to get into kind of why is this happening, the so what behind that, right? And then eventually you start to drill down, I got this pain. Okay, great, where is it? So I have the pain, it gives me kind of the what, how the pain feels like is still a what, but where it is, how long it's been there, when did it start, does it happen more often when I do X or Z, is effectively what's important, right? That allows then the doctor, in this case, the BI professional, right, to go down a path and say, let me start to diagnose and start to eliminate and start to hone into exactly what is causing, the things that we're seeing. Once I'm able to do that, I've officially identified the why I should care. Effectively to my clients, it's what's in it for me, right? So here's the situation, here's the complication with that. It's another way of saying what and so what. Ultimately, what I see with our clients more often than not is once we're able to put our arms around those two questions, now it's about going up to a whiteboard and saying, what are our options? What do we do next? What is the action plan? Therefore, kind of your now what. And as I remind my clients, we had just created a new data point, right? Because it starts all over again. So throughout these processes, it's not that these problems exist in isolation. They exist within a framework. That framework is not necessarily cyclical or closed loop, because that suggests that you get it done and it's the end. It's more like a spiral staircase. And theoretically speaking, the more you go at it, the more you start to continually understand what's happening, and you're better in identifying the what. You're very quick to understand why you should care, and ultimately you can act together with your client to put things into activation.